marrying. And I was like, guys, the last time I dated, we didn't even have cell phones. So now it's like texting and swiping
and Tinder and
all the things. And I was like, I just don't know. And they said, well,
because what I didn't know was that I did not know how to rest. I didn't know what rest was. And for the first time, I think I just released. A lot of season 1 was about imposter syndrome and diving deeper and realizing imposter syndrome was not the root. Thank you so much, Jenn, for coming all the way from Arkansas, all the way here in Austin, Texas, to the show with me. So much has happened since season 1. I just got to tell you. And a lot of it happened at Camp Well, which you founded. I want to get into that, but I want you to just introduce yourself a little bit. Just tell my audience just who you are and what you're about.
Yeah, I do. I live in Arkansas, which a lot of people are I get a head tilt when I say that. But I love to tell people I live in the beautiful part of the state, Northwest Arkansas, with my best friend, my husband, who I got set up on a blind date with about 6 years ago.
Oh, my God.
And he is a middle school educator. I joke that his patience with me comes from being in middle school education for 18 years. But we just live a real simple life in Northwest Arkansas, and we absolutely love it. We don't have kids, and we love just investing in people and friendships there in our church community. So, we love it up there.
Well, I had like 5 people badger me about coming to Camp Well. They're like, you got to go, you got to do it. And I'm like, what is this? What has happened? And I heard a couple of interviews with you from producing another podcast with Taylor Nichols, Speak Life.
Yes.
And it was awesome just to hear your story and just I heard about the blind date. But it still surprises me. Like, it surprised me again when you said that.
I know.
So tell me, how did that happen? I mean, because there was a lot behind that.
There was a lot behind that. I had just come out of a 15-year marriage. I had been walking through a divorce, and some dear friends of mine asked me, hey, would you ever consider dating or remarrying? And I was like, guys, the last time I dated, we didn't even have cell phones. So now it's like texting and swiping
and Tinder and
all the things. And I was like, I just don't know. And they said, well, why don't you tell your high caliber married friends to set you up with their high caliber single friends? And I was like, okay, well, and so and I had no intention of diving into that anytime soon, but I did. I ran into some friends actually here in Austin. I was here for a conference and kind of shared jokingly that with them. They're like, well, we know a guy. He's a 7th grade science teacher in Springdale, Arkansas. And I was like, I did the head tilt. And they said, well, aren't you going to be in town in a couple weeks? And I was. And I had committed earlier, probably 4 months earlier, I had committed to living a year of yes. So I was going to say yes to anything and everything unless it did not align with my values or morals. I was like, I will say yes to anything and everything. And so I was posed with this offer to say yes to a blind date in another state.
Oh, my gosh.
And that's how we met.
Wow.
Yeah, it was so fun.
Yeah.
Crazy and out of the blue, but yeah, that's how.
And before that, during that journey, before the blind date, you had done a lot of work on rest,
yes.
just resting in Lost Valley Ranch, which is where Camp Well, is now.
Yes.
That might change, but
yeah.
Tell me how it was just because you were invited, just come out and just rest. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I had had this dream years before to host something like a retreat, a place for, women to come and rest. But really, truly, I think you and I have had this conversation about, I've tried all the things to find rest, whether it's physical rest or, doing fun things. I think, going on adventures or doing fun things can be restorative, but sometimes our bodies and our souls still don't find rest, even in the practical ways that we rest. And so I thought, what would it look like to create a space where our souls can truly find rest? And so years ago, I had this idea and started the very first Camp Well in fall of 2016. And at that first retreat, it was in Denver, Colorado, downtown, because I didn't know a place like Lost Valley Ranch had existed at that time. Wow. And so one of my dear friends, we had been friends for a couple decades, she came as an attendee to that retreat. And, you plan these things a year in advance. And so when it got to the first Camp Well in fall of 2016, I stood in front of these 30 women. And what they didn't know was that 5 weeks earlier, my husband had left me for the third time in 15 years. And I didn't know I was going to be the third time. And so I didn't know I was going to be walking through that on that very first day of the very first Camp Well. And that friend said, when that Camp Well session was over, she said, why don't you come to this ranch that I help manage and just get away and rest? And so that was my first introduction to this amazing place that we both know is Lost Valley Ranch. And I found incredibly profound healing just in the presence of that space back in 2016.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's awesome that you say that, because my husband hadn't left me. That's not what's going on.
Yeah.
We're still together and happy.
Yeah.
But there were just some things. There were a lot of things that I didn't realize I needed to work through. Getting invited to Camp Well. We had just finished season 1, which was my dream that just kind of manifested.
Yeah.
But what I didn't realize is that my dream wasn't going to heal the things that I thought it was going to heal.
Amen. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, I'm doing my show. This is great. But once the show's recorded and it's done, I still have to sit with the things that are unresolved.
Right.
Still have to sit with the depression and the anxiety and the worrying and the restlessness.
Yeah.
Because what I didn't know is that I did not know how to rest. I didn't know what rest was. I thought, it's sleeping. And sometimes for me that felt lazy.
Yeah.
And so I come to Lost Valley Ranch and I'm literally forced to disconnect.
Yes.
Forced to not, they didn't lock us up, guys. I don't want y'all to think that. They didn't lock us up. They didn't say, we're taking your phones. It wasn't any of that. It was just a very remote place. And so I decided I was going to drive all the way to Colorado from Austin, Texas, instead of fly. This was a last minute decision in my Jeep so that I could escape. I was going to get to
have an escape route.
If I didn't like it, I was going to get back, in the buggy and drive back home. 14 hours in, it was going great. And then I got to the dirt road that you get to before you get, and this is off the side of a cliff, guys. This is not like, just a dirt road, just a normal flat plain. No, I'm on a side of a cliff in my Jeep on a road that's just as narrow as the Jeep is. And at that moment, I realized, okay, I've been set up. Like something is ahead for this.
Yeah.
I got there and all of the feelings, all of the stress, all of the anxiety, all of the things that I needed to do when I got back home started to flood in.
Yeah.
But you all were so intentional on making that space welcoming that you all just met us where we were, and we were all in different, seasons. Us and 40 other women. So we get there and our names are everywhere. We have I just see Bree on my bag and my Bree place card there, and this book and these beauty products and just this glamping basically is what it kind of felt like. And so we get there and we start having some of these conversations that I thought I wasn't ready to have.
Right.
But we start diving into these things that I needed to talk through and work through, and things that I knew that I needed to address when I got back home. And for the first time, I think I just released. Yeah. Just took my hands off the steering wheel and just relaxed. Yeah. And started realizing what some of these feelings, a lot of season 1 was about imposter syndrome. Yeah. And diving deeper and realizing imposter syndrome was not the root. It was a lot of these other things that were contributing to it. And I thought it was the opposite. I thought, I have imposter syndrome. And that's why sometimes I wake up and I feel like this, or why I get anxious all these. And it wasn't that. It was, you haven't rested. Your body is tired, and your mental capacity, you've already gone way past, what that is. So I thank you for creating a space like that.
Well, I think you speak to this idea that we have a false idea of rest. And we do not intentionally create the space in our lives to find true soul rest, which, and you said this, so much of our unrest and restlessness is stored in our brains and our hearts, not just, and it does affect our bodies for sure. But until we do that work of unpacking the things that are holding us back from peace and flourishing, we are still at unrest. Yeah. And that is just the simplest way to say it. We just try to create space that cultivates the ability to do that. And you said it too. You said that and I think when we go do these things, these retreats or things like that, a lot of the messaging is leave everything at home.
Yeah.
Come, but leave everything at home. And that's actually, we say the opposite. We say bring it all in.
Yeah.
Because this is the safe place to unpack and sort through and repack what's true. So we talk about unpack what's holding us back from peace and flourishing and freedom, and repack what's true about who God is and who he says that you are. And it sounds so simple. And in some ways it is, but it takes intentional work and not being afraid of it, because it's scary and intimidating because you don't know what's on the other side of it.
Yeah.
You don't know when you start unpacking what's going to be unpacked.
Yeah.
And that can be intimidating for sure.
Yeah. So I'm unpacking all these things. And even the first part, you all gave us this big binder. There's coursework before and after the retreat. You all gave us this binder, this beautiful one that you designed it, I do believe.
Yeah.
It was gorgeous. And it actually just says unpack, unpack the things. And I think it's hard for people to find space in their everyday lives to do that.
Yeah.
Because not only do they may not have the support system.
Yeah.
They're not really sure how to reach out to them. And for me, it was, I would share the things that I felt comfortable sharing and felt like I was sharing. I was like, I shared that thing, but I'm going to keep this piece for me.
Yeah.
This piece, don't touch it.
Yeah.
It's going to go over here. And I'll address it when I'm ready to address it. And that wasn't true. That was never going to happen. And so that's why we wanted to continue the show, and for this season, talk more about some of those other mental health issues and expand the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is hard, I think, when you don't feel like you have safe spaces with community to do that. I get that. I think a lot of why we want to cultivate spaces like this is in the hope that maybe you meet one person in that space that you've now shared this experience with. But some people do go home and they don't have that. And this is, we're very, and I think you and I've had this conversation, like very pro, like maybe for a season, it's finding a therapist to help create a safe space to unpack all the things. Because so much of our unrest is when we're striving to do more and be more than God ever intended for us.
Yeah.
And we hold all of that in. And sometimes it's out of shame. Sometimes it's out of fear. Sometimes we believe lies that are just not true. They've been narratives we've been carrying over ourselves since we were little.
Yeah.
And those are some of the things that we unpack. Sometimes it's unresolved grief. Like there is a beauty in lamenting. But when we store that grief and don't lament or walk through, we again are striving to do more and be more than we ever were intended to. We are humans. We are frail and weak, but we feel so much shame in that. And so when our bodies carry that, then we are not operating in peace and flourishing.
Yeah.
And so I do see that when we are missing kind of that community piece, it can feel like we're carrying it all by ourselves.
Yeah. And is that kind of the vision that you had, community for Camp Well? I know there was 40 women, but you all were so intentional with how, like, even the roommates, I got like the best roommate. And I was ready to hightail it out of there. I had a Jeep with an air mattress in the back. I was like, if I don't like this person, I'm going outside. Yeah. But that didn't happen. You all were very intentional. Is that the vision that you had for this?
Yeah, I feel like there's a few components in how just I originally saw this vision. One was a space, right? Just creating margin for women, providing that space, providing a process to unpack and repack. And then the community piece is our hope at the end. But it's interesting because I would say a good 8 years before the very first Camp Well, I was always this conference junkie. I loved, some people it's like their worst nightmare, but I was always just this conference junkie. I loved stepping into spaces where I was inspired and encouraged and meet like-minded people. And I think my big dream, 8 years earlier was to host something larger. And then I started journeying through a season of doing my own work. I came to this place where I had to confront. So I had to start doing the work because I got to this place where I had this dream, but then I had all these fears, these insecurities. I was struggling with negative comparison. I was looking around at the success of other people, and it was holding me back. I was getting stuck in fear and lies. And so I had this moment where I realized I had to pause this dream because I had some work to do. And after doing that work, on the other side of that work, my dream looked so different. Instead of being this big, grand conference idea, it was really small. It looked like a small retreat where we could be in a more intimate space that would cultivate more vulnerability and more one-on-one and cultivate community like you're talking about. Yeah. And so that shifted. And so I started dreaming of something smaller. And so a year goes by and I step in, to that very first day of the very first Campwell in 2016. And my life in that process had completely shifted and changed. I was now walking through a divorce, which was life-altering. Yeah. And I was having to confront, again, insecurities. I didn't belong in this space to lead these women. Who was I? Who will they think I am? I felt unlovable. I felt unqualified to be standing there. I was coming face to face, walking in my dream, this thing that, God had given me to do and build and create. Yeah. And yet I was having to come face to face to believe that God is who he says he is. His word is what it says it is. And I am who he says I am. And that third one is really hard. Yeah. And so I'm having to confront that in my own life while trying to lead other women to confront that in their own life. And I had this moment where I was like, am I going to share this piece of my life with them? And I did it in a 1 minute on that very first day. I was real honest. And I think the original dream of, Campwell was to help, cheer women on to, be unstuck in their life. But in that moment, I was like, this is more than that. This is addressing those lies, those fears, those insecurities, overcoming negative comparison. And now I was becoming almost like, I joke that I'm a guide one step ahead. Like I'm doing the work with them. Yeah. I'm coming to terms with the things holding me back while I'm encouraging them to come to terms with the things holding them back. And so when I thought that was going to maybe compromise this first experience, it actually freed the room up to say, I was able to say, me too. I'm right where you are. I am trying to navigate the very same things that you are navigating in these seats in this moment. And something shifted. I think something shifted in the entire dream and vision of Campwell in that day when I realized there is a space to do work of unpacking and repacking. And so that was kind of, and this is why I say I hold dreams loosely. Like hold them with fingers spread apart so that what is not of the Lord will sift through, but what is like pursue what is left. And I think in that moment, things shifted for the vision of Campwell. Yeah.
And it's funny because I'm pretty sure we all came in thinking, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. But yet it's not what you would envision. It wasn't close. I mean, similar, but it wasn't close to what you wanted. And I think for a lot of us, that is the issue. We want it to look, well, I know for me, if it doesn't look like it looks in my head, I'm not happy. Yes. And for the show, I think I needed to go through Campwell to get to season 2. Yeah. Season 2 would not be a thing if there wasn't some type of Campwell that I needed to go through. Yeah. Because I was holding season 1. Yeah. It tight grip. There were a lot of things that I wanted, and I wanted them my way, and they needed to happen this way. And if it's not this way, I don't want it. Yeah. And me having it all together on camera, and then me falling apart. Yeah. Internally, no one saw this. It wasn't like I was going crazy off camera, but internally, it was, what is this? This is not what I want. Yeah. But at the end of the day, after I saw it done and put together, it was exactly what it was supposed to be. And I'm very thankful that it wasn't what I wanted 100%. Yeah. So,
and I think you speak to like what we're talking a lot about unrest or restlessness. Yeah. But when our lives are not congruent, So that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're saying my life on camera didn't feel, you weren't doing anything, intentionally to live incongruent, but you had this moment where you're like, this life on camera and this internal life don't feel congruent with one another. That's all of us, whether that's in our families or at our workspace or, as leaders or, as a mom or a dad, like what is that incongruency where our forward facing lives don't seem to match up with our internal lives. That causes unrest in our souls. And so that is this work of what does it look like for our lives to live congruent, our outside life and our inside life to live congruent with one another. And we joke that it feels like a bait and switch, when people come out, but we are promising them a process to true soul rest. What they don't realize is it takes work and it's uncomfortable. Like that journey on the Jeep road you were talking about, the journey to do that work, it's not comfortable. It is hard, but the bravery comes when are we willing to do it? Because there is something beautiful on the other side of it.
Yeah, it definitely was. Well, the truth is, we're all a hot mess, okay?
All of us.
we're just a hot mess.
All of us.
But there's beauty in that. I don't believe that you can have, or anyone can have the success that they have, or the life that they have, or the joy that they have without the mess. It takes some of that. I mean, think about gardening. It is the messiest thing.
Yes.
You're covered in dirt.
Yes.
Okay, but the things that come out of that are some of the most beautiful things that you'll ever see.
Yeah. I was just sharing with a friend last night that so much of my language will be, I just want to make it through. This is a hard season. I want to make it through this season. And I'm trying to right now change my language and operate in this understanding of grief and joy coexisting.
Wow.
There is so much good in my life, so much flourishing. And also, there is a lot of grief right now. But my joy doesn't steal from my grief, and my grief doesn't steal from my joy. They can both exist at the same time. But we are trying so hard to end and the heart and the grief. And I'm not saying don't work to heal. This is what we're talking about, right? And that's why you are doing the work that you're doing, and I'm doing the work that I'm, because we want people to find healing. But we don't need to find shame in the brokenness. And that is what we're carrying inside our grief, is so much shame. And that's my hope for people, is that they would lay that down and know that grief and joy can coexist.
And the lies that are associated with that.
Yes.
I love that one of the big things about Camp Well was identifying whatever those lie or those lies were. And then just speaking truth. And you all gave examples of some of those, I'm not enough.
Yes.
You're more than enough. You were made for a purpose, on purpose, like those types of things. And I realized I was walking around, I thought the lie was, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. No, I realized my lie was no one cares. No one cares about Bree Clark and who Bree Clark is. And I was met with a beautiful letter from my niece at the retreat. The last person I thought would send me anything. And it wasn't even in the letter that you all, got from the people we knew. It was a random text message that I wasn't supposed to get because we didn't have Wi-Fi. A random text message from my brother-in-law saying, I have to tell you this. At that very moment, right before we got the letters from you all, saying, I just want to let you know how to talk with, talk with your niece. And she said, that how much she just loves you.
Right.
And I thought that I wasn't even a blip on this girl's radar. And to hear that brought so many tears. I'm gonna cry again. So many tears, that, wow. How me? And so I think a lot of people at the retreat had those moments of, I matter, I care, people care about me. And if that's true, then what I've been thinking, maybe that's just been a lie this whole time.
And we exist in a culture that is all about position, power, influence. And a lot of talk about success is in light of that. But the truth is that we all influence someone. And I think in that moment, for you to realize that you have such an influence and impact on your niece, in a way that will alter the course of her life because she's watching you.
Yeah.
And if we would all bring our eyes down to a level where we are surrounded by people who are watching us, and there is an honor in that and a privilege in that to steward well, which is why our work of unpacking and repacking is so important because someone's watching.
Yeah.
And I love that that was a picture of you being able to kind of like, you know, take a deep breath and lower your eyes to see that right beneath your feet, you have influence and you have impact, which is why this work matters, of unpacking what is holding you back from flourishing in peace and repack what's true so that in your niece's eyes, you're operating sometimes in grief, sometimes in joy, but you're doing it well.
Yeah.
And she's watching.
Yeah.
Someone's watching all the time.
Yeah. And I know for some people that could be scary.
Yeah.
But this isn't someone who's watching my success.
No.
Or
No.
any of the things that I thought were
Right.
important. This
Right.
is someone that was
Exactly.
literally just every day when Bree's not being Bree Clark. And that was just kind to get that in that moment. And then all of the letters from the other people there. So it was just nice to have that. So tell me, if you were to leave our audience with anything for them to just take into the rest of whatever this season has in store for them, what would it be?
To not be afraid of that inventory work. You don't have to go to the mountains. You don't have to go to a retreat. You can do it in the quiet and the peace of the spaces you can find. I know if there's a mom listening or a full-time working, woman or man, and they're watching, they're like, how do I find that place? How do I find that, margin? Find it. It's important and it matters, even if it's 5 minutes in the car, 10 minutes in the car where you turn off the music, you turn off that podcast. I have a series of questions that I ask myself consistently to do that inventory. It's, what is that lie I'm believing about myself and others? What is that fear that's consuming me? Oftentimes, whatever we think about the most in a day, that our mind goes to, it points to our fear oftentimes. Is there shame that I'm being held in bondage of, like shame from my past or, something that happened to me? Is there something I need to find freedom from that I'm just allowing to keep me in bondage? Is there, is there something distracting me? We all cope. We all cope with hard things. So is it grabbing our cell phone? Is it, finding work, our value in work? Like what is that thing that's distracting us? And that's distracting us and keeping us from doing the inventory work. But then for some of us, it's unresolved grief. It's saying that will be too much and too hard to sit in.
Yeah.
But oftentimes we think we can go around grief when there's beauty in going through the grief. And so those are some of my inventory questions that I'm constantly asking and sitting in and create a rhythm around. But I would just say, don't be afraid of the inventory work. And we can do it anywhere, anytime. We don't have to be in a magical place to do it.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. There's beauty in the grief. I love that. There's beauty in this whole process. And I hope that the audience takes that away from our conversation. Thank you so much for making this trip and being on the show. I'm going to put all of Jenn's information in the show notes so that you can see her resources, you can connect with her, and you can just check out the beautiful work that Jenn is doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And Jenn, you are the real deal. This has been The Real Deal with Bree Clark. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe, and you can continue to follow the show on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Until next time, real conversations with real people.